A very special visitor came to town. I can't tell if she's from the future or from the past. You know how smallish towns all have this kind of mythology about them? Well, I guess maybe you don't. I'm not too old myself, but I've been around long enough to see it plainly, and for most people, those little tales or rural legends, pun intended, are just that. Like, every small town probably has a well where there's a ghost inside it. Growing up, you probably avoided that well at all costs. Pretty smart ploy, right? Or maybe there's a part of the woods that we must always steer clear from. Oh, and this one is the best. Every small town has an old lady that's a witch, without fail. As a kid, she's the old lady that doesn't talk much, that moves slow, that hardly comes out of her house, etc., etc. Well, my town has a lot of those little legends too, and the older you get, the less interesting they become. I was probably 12 or so when I started realizing that most of them are just little cautionary tales. And without even thinking about it, I would repeat them to younger kids around me, like an evolutionary meme or something. Little fibs that keep the kids out of trouble. But even so, some of those tales stick around, and the big one, in our town, was about the visitor. Growing up, I always believed it wholeheartedly, and even when I got to my early teens, I remembered thinking it was probably all fake. But the adults around me just kept insisting over and over again. This one had to do with our mayor, Mayor Blind. He was quite an old man, pushing 80, but in good spirits, and he loved to tell the tale. What struck me about it, though, is that even to adults he would repeat this, and, unlike most tales, this one had a firm ending. There was a due date, so to speak, and that due date was Thanksgiving in the year 2018, just a few months ago. It was on that day in 1958 when Mayor Blind wasn't Mayor Blind yet. He was just Bill Blind, a young kid working a summer job at our local hotel, and he received a call at the front desk. They called him B back then, and he had just got out of school and was looking to make a few extra bucks so he could save up for his first car. The way he tells it, the phone rang and he picked it up. He expected that it might be a service call, since it was approaching midnight, but he was surprised to hear an unfamiliar woman's voice on the other end. "This is Summer Inn. How can I help you?" he asked in his characteristically cheery tone. The voice on the other end was serene and charming. Lively but sophisticated, he used to say to whoever would listen, and it requested a reservation. Bill flipped open the booking folder and scoured it in a hurry, but this was high season. There wasn't anything available for weeks. He delivered the news to the person on the other end of the call and apologized. The summer was in full swing, he explained, and the hotel wouldn't have any vacancies for another 2 months. But the voice wasn't discouraged in the slightest. It requested merely a reservation on Thanksgiving, and that it was certain there would be an opening. "Why, of course," Bill responded quickly. "That's far enough away, miss. Acule," the voice oozed soothingly. "Day acule." Bill stuttered, trying to reproduce the sound, but it was so foreign, he had a hard time with it. "Okay, miss, for how many days?" "1 night," the voice said back quickly, almost eagerly. He penciled it in and said that they were good to go. The room would be ready, and he looked forward to seeing her. "It won't be for quite some time, I'm afraid," the voice interjected. "I need the room for Thanksgiving, 2018. It didn't compute with Bill. "I'm sorry, I don't know that area code. You were trying to reach the Summer Inn in Vaysville, right?" "The year 2018, Mr. Blind. For an 8 p.m. check-in," the voice now stated firmly. According to Mayor Blind, he doesn't remember the rest of the conversation, nor, according to him, does he recall ever having given the mysterious Miss Acule his name. But nevertheless, being young and conscientious, he did in fact make a note on the booking folder that there had been a reservation for the year 2018. Yes, 2018. Yes, 60 years in the future. He was the laughingstock of the town for doing so. He was called gullible and dumb by most of his peers, and for years the town would tell the story of the young doe-eyed Bill Blind who took the crank call of the century and still didn't live it down. And the years passed. Bill grew into adulthood, married twice. His first wife passed early, had 4 children who by now were old men in their own right, and in his mid-30s ran for mayor and lost. But Bill had no quit in him, and that's something everyone agreed on. He ran in every mayoral race until at the ripe old age of 60, he won. He would joke that it took a generation to die that remembered his old fiasco with Miss Acule before he found enough voters to support him. And he was a marvelous mayor. He was loved by all, was sweet with both children and adults, and in his old age found himself repeating his story about Miss Acule more and more. She was the reason, he would always say, that he never did get that old Chevy he was gunning for. He had such a hard time getting work after his summer at that hotel that by the time he had enough money saved for the car, he had to put it in his family and toward buying a house. That old '56 Chevy that he had longed first as a pipe dream, and then as a goal, and finally as a failure, was something that he relegated to a youthful fantasy that went unfulfilled. And here we were, the whole town, and it was 2018. Mayor Blind's story became more and more relevant as each month crept forward. Soon it was summer, and it was the talk of the town. What will happen on Thanksgiving 2018? Nothing, most people would exclaim, but what if somebody shows? Nobody was more excited than Mayor Blind. He didn't have much time left on this earth, and he joked that if somebody did in fact come, he would die happy. After all, that one phone call seemed to dictate his life. It pushed him away from his sought-after Chevy toward a woman that he loved more than the world. It gave him 4 kids he never thought he'd have. He never did plan on marrying as a young man. It gave him resolve and resilience, so much that he never quit something he started, and that resolve turned into a mayorship he was quite proud of and that we all earnestly benefited from. By November of last year, the Summer Inn, which, believe it or not, was still in existence, extended an offer to Mayor Blind. He was without wife, both had passed by now, and his children had families of their own. And it had been his custom in recent years to take his Thanksgiving holiday at a different family's house each year. His popularity meant he had no lack of invitations. "Come to us," the hotel told him. "Come stand at the old front desk, the very same desk he stood at 60 years before, at 8 o'clock, and after that have a nice dinner with the hotel staff in the lobby." The offer was too good to be true, Mayor Blind said, and accepted eagerly. Would he be made a laughingstock again? It couldn't be. He was too loved at this point, and so people planned to come line up by the hotel on that very Thanksgiving so that he might not feel let down if nothing happened. And so it was that on the 3rd Thursday of that November last year, about half the town decided to have their dinner early so that they could watch the Summer Inn by 8 p.m. My parents and myself were among the onlookers. My mom, she felt like it was a huge waste of time, but my dad's a huge softy, and he felt the story was so romantic that he had to see it to the end. After all, even since he was a kid, he had heard the story. Imagine that for a moment. There are people in my town that were born, lived, and died within the time frame of this story. People who their whole life, when each little legend of our town became less magical, had this to hold on to. It was a spectacle. We stood there, I remember clearly, as the clock ticked along towards 8. It was about 1:45 when I stopped feeling my toes from the cold, and the sea of people shivered almost in unison. A gentle snowfall began, and as people looked eagerly up and down the long street that led to the Summer Inn, we didn't see so much as a single headlight. All the sane people are in their warm homes eating dinner, my mom quipped. Who wants to be normal, honey? My dad shot back, and I smiled. And then the clock struck 8, and the road was as dark as ever. People began muttering, not out of anger, but rather a slight disappointment. It was the result everyone expected, but nobody wanted. The crowd grew restless, and some people started meekly shuffling away. But far away, all the way down that street, a slight glimmer started to fade into view. With each second, it grew brighter, and as it rounded the bend down the road, 2 yellow headlights emerged. Everyone stopped and stared. It couldn't be, they thought. But the lights grew brighter and brighter as the seconds ticked on, and a faint sound of an engine, a loud, choppy engine, started to be heard clearer and clearer. As it was 100 yards or so away, we saw a glimmer in the moonlight of long, sleek black paint, and as it passed into the crowd, we got our first glimpse at the car and its inhabitant. It was a long, black 56 Chevy, pristine. The car was like out of a museum. Through the slight glare of the window, we could make out the head of a young woman, a woman who couldn't have been older than 30, with a teal shawl wrapped around her neck. She drove past us, not for a moment taking a long glance or even acknowledging the crowd that seemed so poised to greet her. The car pulled into the parking lot of the Summer Inn, and with the grace that you don't see people move at much nowadays, the young woman got out and walked into the lobby. The woman was magnetic in every sense. I remembered I had just watched Breakfast at Tiffany's a couple months prior to that night, and I was struck at how much she resembled Audrey Hepburn. I told my parents that I had to see what was going on and snuck away. The crowd stood transfixed as I weaved through it. It was as if people were in such shock that they'd frozen. Might have been the weather too, truth be told. I like to think, though, that most people, except for selfish me, didn't want to interrupt a moment so long in the making, a moment that Mayor Blind had waited for over 60 years. A moment that had, according to him, set in motion a series of events that he believed dictated his entire life. I snaked my way over to the lobby, where I saw Mayor Blind standing at the desk with a tear in his eye. In front of him stood the young woman, and while she was saying something to him that I didn't hear, I saw that he was almost as surprised as everyone else. A moment passed, and the two of them sat down together. I took a seat near them, and for the first time got a glimpse of the woman. She saw me. In fact, her eyes met mine, and she was gorgeous and refined. She had a timeless beauty, the kind of beauty you see in the greats, the Audrey Hepburns, the Rita Hayworths, the Claire Beaus of the world. And she didn't seem to mind in the slightest that I had taken a seat just a few feet from them. The adults from outside still stood there, and even the waitstaff tried their best not to enter that lobby, likely out of respect for the mayor to have his moment. But there I sat, the stubborn 16-year-old that decided I was going to get to the end of this story. "I can't believe you came," I remember Mayor Blind repeating over and over. The woman was charming and sweet, and they talked for about 2 hours. It was almost like an interview. She asked him about that night, and he told her everything. He told her how that phone call had hurt him, and how it propelled him into a relationship that was wonderful, and gave him children, and a resolve to never quit, and how he even credited becoming the mayor to the life lessons he learned from that evening. He told her of the Chevy that he had abandoned ever trying to buy, and how he realized that it was just a trinket, and that the real things in life are family, pushing yourself, being the best you can be. She sat and listened to it all, and smiled, and laughed at even the corniest of jokes. And when he'd finished telling her about everything, and paused, she looked at him warmly and spoke. "Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?" she asked kindly. "That's about it, Miss well, 60 years and I still haven't gotten that name down." She smiled, and Mayor Blind slumped back in his chair and closed his eyes, as if asleep. The woman gingerly reached for her bag, stood up, straightened out her dress, and started walking away. She passed right by me, and as she did, she paused and looked me right in the eye. "Who says death is a mean bag of bones?" she asked and smiled. Before I could respond, she walked away, got back into that old Chevy, and drove back up the road she came from. The town coroner said Mayor Blind died of a heart attack, and the woman, Miss Acule, hasn't been found. Police did try to locate her, but I doubt they'll find her. I doubt anyone will ever find her. That is to say, I doubt anyone will find her when they're looking. But I think we'll all meet her someday.